Maxine Waters marched into the House Oversight Committee room as if she held the deed to the building. In many ways, she actually did. With 32 years on the Hill and her time as the Financial Services Chair, she was a powerhouse who made presidents blink and colleagues tremble. She had outlasted entire administrations, brushed off scandals, and crushed her rivals with nothing but her voice and her sheer willpower. Her designer Chanel suit cost $4,000 more than most of the people she represented earned in a single month. Those diamond earrings caught every bit of light with each dismissive toss of her head. Every hair was perfectly in place. Her makeup was absolutely flawless. She hadn't just dressed for a fight. She'd dressed to prove she was far above the fray entirely. She had no idea that her own daughter had already been cooperating with federal agents for 4 months. She didn't know that the emails she thought were long gone had been pulled from backup servers. She was completely unaware that by the time this day ended, the dynasty she spent 30 years building would come crashing down like a flimsy house of cards in a hurricane. Maxine Waters took her seat in the witness chair like a monarch, putting up with a tedious meeting with commoners. She scanned the committee members, focusing her gaze on the Republicans. She had no use for the Democrats, who feared her and felt nothing but pure disdain for the rest. Dan Bongino sat at the lead investigator's desk with a pile of folders stacked in front of him. A veteran of the Secret Service and the NYPD, he was a blue-collar kid from Queens who'd made a career guarding world leaders and taking down crooks. When Waters looked at him, she saw a nobody, just a failed policeman who'd turned into a podcaster. In her mind, he was a man who hadn't achieved a single thing worth her respect. She was dead wrong about that, too. "Let's be very clear," Waters announced before anyone else could even open their mouth. Her voice boomed through the room with the practiced confidence of 3 decades in power. "I am appearing here under protest. This committee lacks any real authority to interrogate a sitting member of Congress about political work that is protected by law." Bongino hadn't uttered a single syllable yet. He just sat there watching her, biding his time. "I have served this nation for 32 years. That's 32 years spent fighting for civil rights and economic fairness for the poor and the forgotten souls that D.C. ignores. And I refuse to be lectured by some failed Secret Service agent who couldn't cut it in actual law enforcement." She adjusted her designer frames and stared him down with blatant contempt. "I've stood my ground against racists. I've stood my ground against Republicans. I've even stood my ground against presidents. Do you honestly think you scare me?" She let out a laugh. It was a cold, jarring sound. "Now, can we wrap up this little performance? I have actual work to attend to, reclaiming my time." The entire room went silent. Bongino still hadn't said a word. He sat perfectly still with his hands folded, observing her act with the calm of a man who'd protected presidents from much bigger threats than a cocky congresswoman. When he finally opened his mouth, his tone was steady and almost soft. "Are you quite finished, Congresswoman?" "I'm done. And when I say I'm done, I'm reclaiming my—" "No." That one word sliced through the room like a razor. "You aren't reclaiming anything today, Congresswoman. Not your time, not your image, and certainly not your legacy." He flipped open the first folder. "Because every single thing you've reclaimed over these 32 years, every cent, every favor, and every bit of trust your voters gave you, actually belonged to someone else." He lifted up a single piece of paper and told her that today they were taking it all back. He paused to let the gravity of those words sink in. $1.2 million. That is exactly how much your campaign has funneled to your daughter, Karen, over the course of your career for what you call slate mailer services. He dropped the paper onto the desk. Your daughter, your campaign funds, and your family's personal wealth are all laid bare right here in black and white. For a split second, Waters' eyes wavered. It was the first sign of a crack in her mask. And Congresswoman, we're just getting started. We haven't even touched on the mansion, the bank bailout, or that $12 million windfall your husband's firm got after your phone calls. He gave a slight smile. It was anything but friendly. So please, tell me more about reclaiming your time. I'm all ears. Bongino began organizing his files with surgical precision. Every page was flagged, every exhibit was labeled, and every point was ready for the woman who thought she could charm her way out of any corner. Let's kick things off with something basic. Congresswoman, let's talk about your daughter, Karen. Waters's face turned to stone. My daughter operates a perfectly legal business providing services to a variety of political campaigns. $1.2 million. Bongino let that figure linger in the heavy silence. That is the grand total your campaigns and associated groups have paid to Karen Waters throughout your time in Congress. $1.2 million for what you call slate mailer services. He pulled out a stack of payment records that spanned 2 decades. Now, for the folks watching at home who might not be familiar with a slate mailer, let me break it down. It's just a simple flyer, a list of candidates that a voter might consider backing. You print them, you mail them, and most folks just toss them straight into the trash. It's incredibly basic and very cheap to produce. He held up a sample for the room to see. This is a standard slate mailer, 1 sheet of paper with a basic 2-color print job. It's a bare-bones design. Typically, the market rate to produce and mail these is only about $2 to $3 per piece for a normal campaign. Then, he produced the invoices from Karen Waters. Your daughter is charging somewhere between $15 and $20 for every single one. That is 5 to 10 times the standard price for the exact same thing. Waters leaned in, her eyes flashing with anger. My daughter offers high-end services, specific outreach, and strategic expertise, she countered. Bongino gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right, let's take a closer look at those premium services. He pulled out the official corporate filings. Karen Waters runs a company called Progressive Connections. I did my homework, digging through the business licenses, the tax filings, and the employee records. He laid the paperwork out across the desk. Aside from Karen Waters herself, the number of full-time employees is exactly 0. Her office is registered to her own home address. Her professional equipment consists of a single computer and 1 printer. These premium services are being run by 1 woman in her living room, charging 10 times what a professional firm would. He fixed his gaze on Waters. That's not a real business, Congresswoman. That is a money laundering scheme with a fancy title. How dare you say that? Waters slammed her palm against the table. My daughter has spent years building a success. Let me show you what a legitimate consulting firm actually looks like. Bongino pulled out records from established political organizations. A real agency employs staff, account managers, graphic designers, and data experts. They have actual offices and real overhead costs to cover. They invest in professional equipment and expensive software licenses. They have a diverse client list, handling multiple campaigns across various races. He held up Karen Waters' business registration again. Your daughter's operation doesn't have a single one of those things. It's just her, the only employee. She has exactly 1 client. You. She sells 1 product. Overpriced slips of paper. This isn't a consulting business. It's a straight pipeline from your campaign funds right into your family's bank account. He produced even more payment records. Let's look at the timing of these transactions. Every major payout to Karen happens to line up perfectly with a big expense in her personal life. In March 2017, Karen buys herself a brand new car. By April 2017, your campaign pays her $92,000 for what you called enhanced voter outreach. End of quote. He picked up another document. September 2019. Karen puts down a deposit on a vacation home in Palm Springs. By October 2019, your campaign cuts her a check for $115,000 for digital engagement consulting. End quote. He laid out the timeline for the committee. It runs like a Swiss watch. Karen needs some cash. Suddenly, the campaign identifies a need for specialized services. End of quote. The invoices are generated. The checks are signed. And the money hits Karen's account right when she needs it most. He looked directly at the committee members. This isn't legitimate campaign spending. It's an allowance. It's a massive allowance funded by donors who thought they were contributing to a political movement. Let's see just how successful this really is. Bonino pulled out the comparative data. I looked up what other campaigns are paying for the exact same services. I've got the proof right here. The DCCC pays about $3.40 per piece. The California Democratic Party gets it done for $2.90. Even Senator Feinstein's campaign only paid $3.20. He set the comparison charts down. Karen Waters is charging $18.50. That is over 500% more than what the party itself pays for the same paper, same ink, and same postage. He turned his attention back to the committee. There is a specific term for paying a family member vastly inflated rates for work that costs a fraction of that elsewhere. That word is fraud. Waters' voice escalated to a near yell. I am reclaiming my time. I won't sit here and listen to. You'll listen today, Congresswoman. For the first time in 32 years, someone else is going to do the talking. Bongino pulled out a fresh stack of documents. Let's analyze the payment schedule. Like clockwork, every single election cycle, the payments to Karen Waters go up. $85,000 in 2016, $112,000 in 2018, $145,000 in 2020, and $168,000 in 2022. He traced the rising line on the graph. Your campaign expenses climb every cycle. And somehow, Karen's piece of that pie just keeps getting bigger and bigger. What an incredible coincidence that is. He held up a printout of an internal email. This was sent from your campaign manager to the finance director on March 15, 2018. Let me read this for the record. He read each word slowly, making sure the weight of every syllable was felt. Quote, MW wants Karen's payment bumped up this cycle. She's got a house renovation coming up, so let's add $50K to the mailer budget and label it as expanded outreach. End of quote. He placed the email on the table. A house renovation. Your daughter's home was renovated by your donors, the teachers, the nurses, and the working-class people who sent in $25 because they believed you were fighting for them. He pulled out one last document. Let me tell you the story of one of those donors. Rosa Martinez is a housekeeper living in your district who cleans homes in Hancock Park for $15 an hour. A photograph flashed onto the screen. It showed an elderly Latina woman with weary eyes and the worn hands of a laborer. For 6 years, Rosa donated $25 a month to your campaign. That adds up to $1,800 total. That was money she could have used for medicine, for groceries, or for her grandchildren. Bongino crunched the numbers out loud. You want to know the truth? In Karen Waters' world, $1,800 only buys about 100 pieces of paper. 100 pieces of campaign junk mail that went straight into the trash. He looked directly at Waters. Rosa skipped meals just to donate to you. And you funneled her money into your daughter's fake business to pay for house renovations. That isn't public service, Congresswoman. That's theft. Waters O'Meara's composure was starting to crack. The payments to my daughter are completely legal. Legal and ethical are two very different things. Legal and right are two very different things. You've spent 32 years exploiting the gap between what's legal and what's decent. He shut that section of the folder. But your daughter isn't the only family member who's gotten rich off your position. Let's talk about your husband. Let's talk about the bank. And let's talk about $12 million of taxpayer money. Bongino opened a new section of his folder. This one contained property records, photographs, and financial documents. Before we get to the bank bailout, I want to paint a picture for everyone watching, because understanding where you live helps us understand who you really are. He pulled out a photograph. This is your home, Congresswoman. Windsor Boulevard, Hancock Park, Los Angeles. 6 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a swimming pool, a 3-car garage, and a manicured lawn kept up by professional landscapers. The current estimated value is $6.1 million. The image appeared on the chamber's screens, a sprawling mansion with palm trees and luxury cars in the driveway. It's a beautiful home, the kind of home most Americans can only dream about. The kind of home that says, "You've really made it." He pulled out a map. There's just one problem. This home is not in your congressional district. He pointed to the boundaries clearly marked on the map. California's 43rd Congressional District, Watts, Willowbrook, and parts of South Los Angeles, some of the poorest neighborhoods in the state. The median household income is $44,000. The median home value is $280,000. He traced the district boundaries, and here, miles away, is Hancock Park. The median household income there is $153,000. The median home value is $2.8 million. It's not part of your district. Not even close. He set the map down. You represent some of the poorest people in California. You live among some of the richest. That's quite a commute, Congresswoman, both geographically and morally. Waters shifted in her chair. Members of Congress are only required to maintain a residence in their district. Where I choose to live primarily is your personal business, of course. Let's look at that district residence you maintain. He pulled out more photographs. This is the address listed as your official district residence, a small house on West 80th Street. The assessed value is approximately $400,000. The contrast with the mansion was stark. We investigated this property, spoke to neighbors, and pulled utility records. Do you know what we found? He held up the utility bills. The average monthly electricity usage at your district address is 47 kilowatt hours. Do you know what that means? That means nobody lives there. A typical household uses about 900 kilowatt hours per month. Your residence uses about 5% of that. He set the bills down. The lights come on occasionally, probably when you need to prove you were there. But nobody lives in that house, Congresswoman. It's a prop, a legal fiction, a way to pretend you live among the people you claim to represent. He pulled out more documentation. Meanwhile, your Hancock Park mansion lists you as the primary resident on property tax documents, insurance policies, and every other official record that actually matters. He looked at her with something approaching disgust. Let me paint the full picture. Your constituents live in neighborhoods with bars on their windows. You live in a neighborhood with private security patrols. Your constituents worry about paying rent. You have a swimming pool. Your constituents take the bus. You have a 3-car garage. He pulled out vehicle registration records. Speaking of cars, your primary vehicle is a Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan. The base price is $112,000. That car costs more than 2.5 years of your average constituent's total household income. He pulled out more expense records. Your wardrobe, based on photographs and identifications by our fashion consultants. Annual spending is estimated at over $60,000. Chanel, St. John Oscar de la Renta. The suit you're sporting right now has a retail price of about $4,200. He pointed toward her expensive attire. The lady who cleans your home, yes, we actually spoke with her, only earns $15 an hour. She would have to work for 280 hours straight just to pay for what you're wearing today. That equals 7 full weeks of full-time labor for a single outfit. He then pulled out more records regarding her lifestyle. These are your travel costs. We grabbed these files through public records requests. Over the last 5 years, you've gone on 17 trips featuring first-class tickets, costing your campaign over $200,000. He displayed photos taken from social media. Here's a shot of you in Paris. Here you are on the Amalfi Coast. And here's a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. All of this while the people you represent struggle to even pay for a bus ride to work. He brought out restaurant bills discovered through campaign finance records. These are dinner charges billed directly to your campaign. March 2021, at Spago in Beverly Hills for $427. April 2021, at Nobu in Malibu for $563. June 2021, at Providence for $612. He tallied up the numbers. In just 1 year, more than $15,000 was spent on fancy dining and charged to your campaign. Meanwhile, 22% of the kids in your district rely on free school lunches because their parents can't afford to feed them. He dropped the receipts on the table. You're eating at Nobu. They're relying on food banks, yet your lifestyle is funded by donations from the very same working people who put their trust in you. Waters's face turned a deep shade of red. How you spend your private money becomes your voters' business the moment you get rich representing them while they stay poor. For 32 years, Congresswoman, you've held that seat for over 3 decades. Let's take a look at what's actually improved in all that time. He pulled up the data. Think back to 1991, when you first took office. The poverty rate in your district was 23%. Back then, your net worth was estimated at roughly $200,000. He revealed the current statistics. In 2024, the poverty rate in your district is still 21%. It's essentially stayed exactly the same. But your personal net worth has climbed over $4 million. He paused to let those figures sink in. In 32 years, poverty in your area hasn't moved more than 2 percentage points, well within the margin of error, meaning it's basically unchanged, yet your own wealth has grown 20 times over. He leaned in closer. You got wealthy, Congresswoman. Incredibly wealthy. And the people you serve are still broke, still fighting to get by, and still waiting for that change you've been pitching for 30 years. He produced a video clip. Take a look at this. This is James Wilson, a 67-year-old retired janitor who has spent his whole life in your district. The video showed an older black man sitting in a humble living room. She only shows up every 2 years looking for a vote, James remarked. She gives these pretty speeches. She claims she's on our side, but I've never once seen her walk down my block. I've never seen her at the market. I've never seen her at our church. He gave a slow shake of his head. My neighborhood looks even worse today than when she first started. The roads are falling apart. The schools are failing. There are no jobs for the kids. And meanwhile, She's living in a mansion on the wealthy side of town. He stared straight into the lens. You can't represent a people if you don't even live among them. You can't grasp our struggles while you're sitting by a swimming pool. The clip ended. Bongino turned his attention back to Waters. Your voters know the truth, Congresswoman. They've known it for a long time. They just haven't had anyone brave enough to say it out loud. He moved to the next segment. Now let's dive into exactly how you became so rich. Let's discuss the calls, the meetings, and that $12 million that bailed out your husband's investment. Bongino's voice grew quiet as he started the next section. This was the very core of the corruption. It's the most blatant example of self-dealing in Maxine Waters' long time in power. It's September 2008, the height of the financial crisis, with banks collapsing nationwide, markets in a panic, and the government rushing to stop a total economic meltdown. He laid out the scene. In the middle of all that turmoil, the Treasury Department gets a call, a specific request for a meeting from you, Congresswoman, regarding just one bank, One United. He pulled out the call logs. This is the Treasury's official record of that conversation. September 23, 2008. The caller was Representative Maxine Waters. The topic, an urgent meeting regarding One United Bank. He looked her in the eye. Back then, hundreds of banks were underwater, maybe thousands. But you didn't reach out about minority-owned banks in general. You didn't call to ensure your constituents had access to banking. You called specifically to help One United. He produced another file. Let's talk about your ties to One United Bank. Your husband, Sidney Williams, is a former U.S. ambassador. He had a very distinguished career. He sat on the board of directors for One United Bank. He held significant stock in One United. It's all right here in these financial disclosure forms. He laid the evidence out on the table. So here's the situation. Your husband has a direct financial stake in this bank. That bank is on the brink of collapse. If it goes under, your husband loses his seat on the board, and his shares become total junk. So, what do? You pick up the phone and dial the Treasury Department yourself. Waters sat up, looking defiant. I was fighting for minority-owned banks that were being ignored in the bailout talks. Is that so? Let's take a look. Bongino produced the meeting records. That Treasury meeting took place on September 25, 2008. The room was filled with One United Bank officials and reps from the National Bankers Association, but the entire conversation centered specifically on One United's desperate need for emergency cash. He held up the official notes. Minority banks in general? No. This meeting was focused on a single bank, the very bank where your husband had his money, the one bank that would have flatlined without government intervention. He revealed the final outcome. 3 months down the line, One United Bank was handed $12 million from the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP funds, taxpayer money, and your own constituents' cash, all to keep that bank alive and safeguard your husband's investment. He ran the numbers. Sidney Williams's stake in One United was valued at roughly $350,000. If that bank had collapsed, which it absolutely would have without that bailout, those shares would have been worth exactly zero. Zip. That single phone call was worth $350,000 to your family. Waters' lawyer leaned in to whisper something to her. She brushed him off with an angry wave. My husband had already stepped down from the board by the time that meeting happened. Let's verify that timeline. Bongino pulled out the corporate filings. Sidney Williams's resignation from the One United board was officially dated September 26, 2008. The Treasury meeting took place on September 25th, exactly 1 day earlier. He was still sitting on that board when you set the meeting up. He placed the timeline on the table. But let's be crystal clear about the stakes here. One United Bank was in a death spiral. They had gambled heavily on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac securities. When those tanked, One United was staring down catastrophic losses. Without a government lifeline, the bank was finished. End of story. He pulled out the financial analysis. If One United had gone bankrupt, your husband's $350,000 in stock would have vanished. His board position, which pulled in a $40,000 annual stipend, would have disappeared too. Your family stood to lose nearly $400,000. He turned his gaze toward the committee. So, how did Congresswoman Waters handle it? She didn't file a single disclosure. She didn't step back or recuse herself from the situation. Instead, she went straight to the top and called the Treasury Department herself. She leveraged her power as a senior member of the Financial Services Committee to broker a special meeting for one specific bank, the one her husband was invested in. He pulled out more phone records, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. We have the logs for 3 separate calls from your office to Treasury during that 2-week period. 3 calls, all focused on One United, all while your husband was on their board and holding their stock. He fanned out the call logs. September 23rd, the initial call to request the meeting. September 24th, the follow-up to lock in the attendee list. September 29th, a call to, and I quote, check on the status of the application. End quote. You weren't just advocating, you were lobbying with everything you had. Even after he left the board, he still held those shares. He still had a massive financial stake, and you still had a blatant conflict of interest that you never bothered to disclose. He pulled out the House Ethics Committee report. Let's see how your own colleagues viewed this. The House Ethics investigation finally wrapped up in 2012 after 3 years of stalling. He read directly from the findings. Quote, Representative Waters' actions raised significant concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest. While they couldn't find enough evidence to prove she knowingly broke the rules, the committee was deeply concerned about the failure to disclose the family's financial ties. End quote. He set the report aside. Significant concerns, appearance of conflict, serious concerns about disclosure. In Washington speak, that means you got caught doing something wrong, but you're too powerful to punish. He pulled out the voting logs. The Ethics Committee was stuck in a partisan deadlock. Just Democrats looking out for Democrats. The investigation was dragged out for 3 years until everyone eventually forgot. And you just walked away scot-free. He looked her in the eye. Until now? He produced one final document. This is a note from the Treasury staffer who actually took your call. Quote, Representative Waters mentioned her husband's involvement with the institution. End quote. He repeated the words slowly. Mentioned her husband's involvement. You confronted her saying, Congresswoman, you reported that conflict to the Treasury Department. You were fully aware of what you were doing. And yet, you went ahead with it anyway. Waters was visibly shaking now, whether from fury or genuine fear. It was difficult to distinguish between the two. I am reclaiming my time. I'm not going to sit here while we ignore $12 million. That is the price tag on those phone calls you made. $12 million in public funds were used to rescue a bank where your husband held an investment. He laid out all the evidence regarding that bank bailout. Your own daughter receives more than $1 million. Your husband's stake is shielded by $12 million of the taxpayers' money. Your personal wealth increases by millions, even as the people you represent remain in poverty. He stared at her with a look of pure, open disdain. This isn't what public service looks like, Congresswoman. This is a scheme to enrich your family, and you're just using your seat in Congress as the tool to pull it off. He opened the next section of the file. But this goes beyond just the money, doesn't it? It's also about power, and specifically how you've wielded that power to bully, threaten, and stir up trouble. Bongino turned his attention from the financial scandals to something just as harmful: Waters' habit of using provocative language. Let's discuss the things you've said, Congresswoman, because what you say actually carries weight. That's especially true for an elected leader, and even more so when those words push people to take to the streets. He produced a list of her past remarks. Think back to June 23, 2018, during a rally in Los Angeles. You were addressing the immigration policies of the Trump administration. Allow me to quote your exact words. He spoke each word with deliberate clarity. To quote you, "If you spot anyone from that cabinet in a restaurant, a store, or even at a gas station, get out there, gather a crowd, push back, and let them know they aren't welcome anywhere anymore." He laid the transcript aside. Gather a crowd. Push back against them. Tell them they aren't welcome anywhere. That is precisely what you instructed your followers to do to members of the president's cabinet. Waters shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I was referring to peaceful protesting," she countered. "It's the First Amendment. Let's take a look at the fallout from that speech." Bongino brought out several news articles. On June 22, 2018. Just a day before you spoke, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was kicked out of a restaurant in Lexington, Virginia. The owner claimed her presence was simply not welcome there. He moved on to the following report. On June 25, 2018, 2 days after your rally, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was confronted and heckled out of a Mexican restaurant in D.C. A mob quickly formed. Chants and shouting forced her to make an exit. Yet another report. June 26, 2018. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi was harassed at a movie theater. A crowd swarmed her, shouting insults and making threats. He put the news clippings down. Gather a mob. Push back. Not welcome anywhere. Those people did exactly what you commanded them to do. Waters' tone turned cold and sharp. "I never once called for violence," she insisted. "Let me share the dictionary's definition of incitement with you." Bongino flipped open a reference book. Incitement. The act of provoking illegal behavior or urging others to break the law, to stir up, to push for action, or to provoke. He shut the book. You told your followers to track down cabinet members at gas stations and restaurants while they were with their families to create scenes. You instructed them to push back. What outcome were you honestly expecting? He pulled out even more of her past quotes. Let's examine the recurring theme here. This wasn't just a single mistake. This is clearly a part of who you are. He started reading from 2017. "I'm going to take out Trump," he quoted. Take out? That is certainly an interesting choice of phrasing. Then there was 2018, with the cabinet confrontation speech we just talked about. In 2019, you said, "Trump is the most dishonorable and disgusting human being to ever hold the office of the presidency." In 2020, you led a mob chanting, "No justice, no peace." Just weeks after that, cities across the country were on fire. Then came 2021. During the Derek Chauvin trial, you went to Minneapolis and told protesters to get even more confrontational if the verdict wasn't guilty. Even the judge described your remarks as absolutely abhorrent. He set the list of quotes down. It's a clear pattern, Congresswoman. You've spent years using inflammatory language. You've spent years pushing for confrontation. You've spent years fueling anger while you stay perfectly safe in your own mansion. He produced your financial expense records. Since we're talking about safety, let's discuss personal protection. He held up the documents showing the costs of your security. You have demanded that police departments be defunded. You've labeled law enforcement as being systemically racist. You've called for fewer officers on the streets and less money for public safety. He pointed directly at the figures. This is what your personal security detail cost taxpayers and campaign donors over the last 4 years. $762,000. He let that massive figure hang in the air for a moment. That is over $750,000, just to keep you safe. You have armed guards, highly trained pros, and round-the-clock protection. He locked eyes with her. You get full police protection, while the people you represent get fewer police. That seems to be the Maxine Waters philosophy. Safety for me, but not for you. He brought up one final comparison. January 6th, 2021. You voted to impeach President Trump for what you called incitement of insurrection. All because he told his supporters to march peacefully to the Capitol and let their voices be heard. He held the transcript of Trump's speech right next to Waters' comments from 2018. He said, "March peacefully." You said, "Create crowds and push back." He was impeached. You didn't face a single thing. He laid both transcripts on the table. The only real difference between your incitement and what you accused the president of is that your side never faced charges. But the words and the intent are exactly the same. Actually, it's even worse, because you specifically told people to confront individuals, make them feel unwelcome, and push back. Waters was breathing heavily now as her calm exterior started to fall apart. You can't compare the two. I was talking about being peaceful. This is just a racist attack on a black woman who is reclaiming my time. Bongino's voice boomed through the room, throwing her own words right back at her. That's your go-to line, isn't it? Whenever someone actually holds you accountable. Racism, sexism, witch hunts, anything to avoid answering the real question. He leaned in close. You've been hiding behind those words for 32 years. Today, they don't work anymore. He opened up the final major section of the case. And that brings us to the biggest question of all, the one the people you represent have been asking for decades. After 32 years, after all the speeches, the promises, and the anger, what have you actually done for them? Bongino paused for a moment before starting this section. This was the heart of the case, the real reason everything else mattered. Let's take a look at your legacy, Congresswoman. 32 years in office, nearly a third of a century representing the same communities. What have you actually accomplished? He pulled out the legislative records. I had my staff put together a full list of major legislation authored by Maxine Waters that became law and directly helped her constituents. He held up a thin folder and flipped through its pages. Most of them were blank, or only had minor things listed. Renamed post offices, congratulatory resolutions, and ceremonial proclamations. That's pretty much all of it. He set the folder down. In 3 decades, you've renamed some buildings and passed a few resolutions. Your district still doesn't have a new hospital. It still lacks major infrastructure improvements, and it still doesn't have job programs that actually work. He pulled out her entire legislative history. Let me be specific. In 32 years, the number of major bills authored by Maxine Waters that became law and created jobs in her district is 0. The number of infrastructure projects she secured specifically for her community is just 2 minor street repairs. The number of successful housing initiatives she authored is 0. He compared her record to other representatives. Congressman Jim Clyburn, who represents a similarly struggling district in South Carolina, secured over $3 billion in federal investment for his people. Congressman Benny Thompson brought hundreds of millions of dollars to the Mississippi Delta. These are real numbers, real improvements, and real results. He looked directly at Waters. What did you bring? Speeches, anger, TV appearances, and a personal bank account that grew by $4 million. He brought up the economic data. Let me show you something, Congresswoman. He wrote 2 sets of numbers on a display board. In 1991, the poverty rate in your district was 23%. Unemployment was at 11%. The median household income, adjusted for inflation, was $38,000. He wrote down the second set. In 2024, the poverty rate is 21%. Unemployment is 9%. The median household income is $44,000. He stepped back. In 32 years, poverty improved by only 2 percentage points. Unemployment went down by just 2 points. And income only increased by $6,000. That isn't progress, Congresswoman. That's just statistical noise. That is stagnation. He pulled out comparison data from other districts. Let me show you what real representation actually looks like. Take the 3rd Congressional District of Georgia. They had similar demographics in the 90s. High poverty, struggling schools, and a lack of economic opportunity. Over that same 30-year span, poverty dropped by 8 percentage points. The median income increased by more than $15,000 when adjusted for inflation. He showed another example, Newark, New Jersey, which was once considered a hopeless case. It faced the same challenges as your district, but with engaged leaders and representatives who actually worked on laws instead of just giving speeches. The city was transformed. Poverty went down 9 points. Crime dropped significantly. There were new businesses, new jobs, and new hope. He set the comparisons down. It is possible to actually help communities like yours, Congresswoman. Other cities have done it. Other representatives have done it. It just requires caring more about the people you represent than your TV appearances. He pointed back to his earlier notes about her wealth. But your net worth went from $200,000 all the way to $4 million. Your daughter pocketed over $1 million. Your husband's assets were shielded by $12 million in taxpayer-funded bailouts. He put the pieces together. Your family grew wealthy. Your district remained in poverty. 32 long years. And that is your true legacy. He produced a compilation of videos. Let me show you exactly what your own voters think about that legacy. The screen displayed 78-year-old Dorothy Williams, sitting in her small Watts apartment. I've cast my vote for her in every single election since 1992. 30 years. And yet, my neighborhood looks even worse today than when she first started. Her voice began to tremble. I sent her campaign $20 every month for 15 years straight. That adds up to $3,600. That is money I could have spent on my own medicine, food, or my grandchildren. And where did that money actually go? To her daughter's sham company? She wiped her eyes. I really believed in her. I thought she was truly out there fighting for us, but she was only ever fighting for herself. The footage shifted to 44-year-old Marcus Johnson, standing on a cracked sidewalk in South Los Angeles. My grandmother voted for her. My mother voted for her. I cast my vote for her. That's 3 generations of trust. And what exactly do we have to show for it? He pointed toward the decaying infrastructure surrounding him. The same broken-down streets, the same failing schools, and the same hollow promises. But while her mansion grew larger and her daughter got richer, we ended up with nothing. The video then cut to Patricia Chen, a 56-year-old small business owner. I reached out to her office 6 times pleading for help with permits, regulations, and the red tape that was strangling my business. You know what happened? All I got back were form letters. It was the exact same form letter 6 times in a row. She shook her head in disbelief. She doesn't give a damn about us. We're nothing but votes to her, just statistics. Just a means to stay in power so her family can keep cashing in. The video faded to black. Bongino let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Those are the people you represent, Congresswoman. The very people you've claimed to stand for over these 32 years. These are the people whose trust you've traded away and whose money you've funneled directly to your family. He produced one final piece of evidence. And this is how you actually view them. He held up a digital audio file. This recording was captured at a high-end fundraiser in Bel Air back in September 2022. It was at a home worth more than every single house on any block in your district put together. The audio began to play. Waters' unmistakable voice was heard speaking to a room of wealthy donors. These people back in the district don't care about policy. They don't even understand policy. They just need someone to be angry on their behalf. They need someone to scream at the right targets. That's what I provide them. Anger. Hope is a luxury for people who can actually afford it. The donors erupted in laughter. They'll keep voting for me forever. It's not like they have anywhere else to go. And as long as I keep performing the battles they want to see fought, they won't bother asking questions about actual results. The recording stopped. The room fell deathly silent. Bongino's voice dropped to a low, almost mournful tone. It sounded almost sad. Hope is for people who can afford it. That is what you said about the very people you represent. The ones who gave you their votes, their trust, and their dreams. He looked her straight in the eye. You've built an entire career on keeping people trapped in poverty and rage, Congresswoman, because people who are poor and angry don't stop to ask questions. They don't demand any real results. They just need a villain to blame. And you've always been more than happy to give them someone to point at, as long as that person isn't you. He gathered up his files. There's a specific term for someone like you. Someone who builds wealth by keeping others in poverty. Someone who cashes in on suffering while pretending to be the solution. Someone who bleeds the very people they are supposed to protect. He paused for effect. A poverty pimp. That's the phrase. And it fits you to a T. Waters flew into a rage. How dare you? You don't know the first thing about my community. You're just a white man who's never walked my streets or seen the struggles my people endure. I built that community from the ground up. I gave those people a voice. She was screaming now, all composure gone, and the mask completely shattered. Without me, they wouldn't have a single thing. I have been in the trenches for them for 32 years. And you? You think you can walk in here and I'm not going to? Bongino waited for her to run out of steam. Without you, Congresswoman, they might finally have a representative who actually helps them instead of using them for profit. He snapped the folder shut. Without you, they might have someone who actually lives in the neighborhood instead of a mansion miles away. Without you, Dorothy Williams might have kept that $3,600 to help her own family instead of paying for your daughter's home upgrades. He stood up and said, "Your time has run out, Congresswoman. 32 years is enough, and the people you took it from are finally reclaiming it." The mood in the chamber had completely shifted. The atmosphere was different now. Even the Democrats on the committee couldn't bring themselves to look at Waters. "Before we move to the vote on the referral," Bongino said, "I have one final update to share." He produced a document bearing an FBI letterhead. Your daughter Karen has been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 4 months. Waters went completely numb. Every bit of color vanished from her face. She turned over the internal emails, the bank records, and the messages proving you personally directed those padded payments. Nearly everything I've shown today regarding the family business came directly from her. You're lying. Waters' voice was nothing more than a faint whisper. She signed a formal cooperation deal back in March. He held the document up for everyone to see. Karen Waters' signature clearly visible right at the bottom. Your very own daughter, Congresswoman. She decided that a stint in federal prison simply wasn't worth protecting you anymore. She's looking at serious charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Flipping on you was her only real way out. Waters just stared at that signature, her daughter's handwriting, the very child she had brought into the family business. Karen wouldn't do this. She couldn't. But she did. She handed over 4 full years of emails, bank records, and text logs. She laid it all out for the investigators. How the money moved, how the invoices were padded, and how you personally signed off on every single transaction. He placed the cooperation agreement down on the table. The people you trusted are finally turning their backs on you, Congresswoman. Your daughter already has. Now, the only question is, who's next in line? A committee staffer passed a document to the ranking Democratic member. She scanned it, shut her eyes for a moment, and then began to speak. I have a statement to enter into the record from the Congressional Black Caucus. Waters spun around. This was the CBC, her people, her core base, the very group she'd helped lead for over 30 years. The ranking member read each word carefully. While the Congressional Black Caucus respects Representative Waters' decades of service, the evidence presented today raises serious concerns that demand an independent investigation. The caucus cannot and will not stand in the way of legitimate oversight regarding potential misconduct. We urge our colleague to cooperate fully with the investigators." End quote. Waters looked like she'd just taken a physical blow to the face. After all I've done for them, all I've built, and every sacrifice I've made. They aren't protecting you anymore, Congresswoman. Bongino's tone was surprisingly soft. Actually, no one is. Senator Warner, a Democrat, cleared his throat. I have to say, given the evidence regarding family payments, the bank bailout, and a lifestyle that doesn't match her district's reality, a referral to the Justice Department is both right and necessary. Senator Klobuchar nodded her head in agreement. I concur. These questions deserve the kind of answers only a formal investigation can provide. One after another, the Democrats on the committee voiced their support for an inquiry. It wasn't all of them, but it was plenty. Waters tried to mount one last defense. This is a lynching. Her voice was trembling. A political lynching of a black woman who had the courage to speak truth to power. You will not silence me. You will not tear down what I have built. I have given my entire life to Congresswoman. Bongino's voice sliced right through her. Your daughter isn't white. Your old allies in the CBC aren't Republicans. The evidence itself isn't racist. And those donations from Rosa Martinez aren't some grand conspiracy. He kept his gaze steady on her. You aren't being lynched. You're being held accountable. For the first time in 32 years, someone is finally reclaiming the time you stole from the people you represent. The chairman called the room to vote. All those in favor of a criminal referral to the Department of Justice signify by saying aye. The final tally was 14-7. bipartisan. Decisive, Waters felt every single vote land like a physical strike. There were the Republicans, as expected, but also the Democrats, her own colleagues who had sat beside her for decades. The motion carries. This committee will prepare a formal referral to the DOJ for potential campaign finance violations, self-dealing, bank fraud, and abuse of office. The chairman turned his eyes toward Waters. Representative Waters, I strongly advise you to hire legal counsel. This hearing is now adjourned. The gavel slammed down. Waters just sat there, frozen, for a long, heavy moment. At 84 years old, the struggle of just standing up was obvious. Her legs were shaking, and her hands were visibly trembling. She'd entered that room as a titan of power. After 32 years of being feared, celebrated, and completely untouchable, the aura was gone. She walked out looking small, aged, and totally alone. Her daughter had betrayed her trust. Her own caucus had left her behind. Her entire legacy was now in pieces. There would be no more reclaiming my time. Her time had simply run out. The video footage ripped across the internet like a wildfire. Inside of an hour, the clips were viral everywhere. There was Waters screaming about a lynching. There was the moment the CBC statement hit, the shock of Karen's betrayal, and that final, broken walk out of the room. 2 hours later, Poverty Pimp was the #1 trend in the country. The cable news networks switched to wall-to-wall coverage. Pundits who had spent 30 years calling her an icon were suddenly at a loss for words. By the 3-hour mark, a crowd had gathered outside her mansion in Hancock Park, and they weren't there to support her. In Watts, Willowbrook, and the neighborhoods Maxine Waters claimed to represent for 3 decades, former constituents gathered around televisions in barbershops, churches, and community centers, demanding answers. The public reaction wasn't exactly what many were expecting. Dorothy Williams sat in her cramped apartment, eyes fixed on the news, still clutching a receipt for 15 years of donations in her hand. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered quietly. "I think I've always known deep down, but I just wanted to believe. I needed to believe that someone was actually out there fighting for us." She slowly ripped the receipt into tiny pieces. I was a fool. We were all fools. Across South Los Angeles, Marcus Johnson stood on the same cracked sidewalk where he'd originally filmed his testimony. 32 years, he told the reporters who tracked him down. Basically my entire life, and she was getting wealthy the whole time. Getting rich off our votes, our struggles, and our hope. He kicked at a piece of crumbling concrete. You know what the worst part is? We'll probably just elect someone exactly like her, because that's just how the system works. That's just how it always works. At a community center in Compton, a group of elderly women, once Waters' most loyal supporters, sat in stunned silence as the replays rolled. "I defended her for years against everyone," one of them remarked. "I called people racists for even questioning her. I called them all liars." She simply shook her head. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong." That evening, Dan Bonino sat in his car outside the Capitol with the engine off, watching the sunset through the windshield. He couldn't stop thinking about Maxine Waters walking into that hearing room. The sheer arrogance, the disdain, and the absolute belief that 32 years of power had made her untouchable. He thought about the people living in her district, people like Dorothy Williams, with her 15 years of hard-earned donations. He thought of Marcus Johnson and 3 generations of trust that had been betrayed. He thought of the children growing up in poverty while their representative built a fortune. Reclaiming my time. That was her signature catchphrase, her whole brand. Those were the words she used to shut down anyone who dared to challenge her. But it was never actually her time to reclaim. It was theirs, her constituents' time, their hopes, their futures, and those $25 donations they'd scraped together from nothing. She had stolen every bit of it. And finally, someone had taken it all back. His phone suddenly buzzed. It was a text from his wife. "How are you feeling?" He paused for a long moment before typing back. "Like I actually did my job." Like someone finally held one of these people accountable. But mostly, it feels like she's just the one person out of hundreds doing the exact same thing. Her reply came back almost instantly, one at a time. That's how it works. He started the car and began his drive home. Tomorrow would bring more investigations, more hearings, and more politicians who had turned their backs on their oaths and the people who trusted them. The work was never truly over, but tonight, at least, there was a sense of justice. It was small and incomplete, but it was real. 2 weeks later, Maxine Waters announced her immediate retirement from Congress. The official statement mentioned health concerns and a desire to be with family. It made no mention of the ongoing investigation. It didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing whatsoever. There was no apology for Dorothy Williams, Marcus Johnson, or the thousands of other constituents who had handed over their votes, their money, and their hopes. Still, the investigation moved forward. Grand juries were convened, subpoenas were served. Karen Waters' cooperation turned out to be both extensive and devastating. In California's 43rd District, a special election was called to fill the empty seat. New candidates began to emerge. Some made the same old promises Waters had made, while others tried to offer something new. Dorothy Williams, now 78 years old, registered to vote in that special election. It would be her first time casting a ballot for someone other than Maxine Waters in over 30 years. "Maybe this one will be different," she said, though her voice lacked much hope. "Maybe this one will actually fight for us," she said, pausing for a moment. "Or maybe there'll just be another one just like her. Getting wealthy while we're still struggling. Giving speeches while nothing actually changes." She gave a little shrug. "But I'm going to vote regardless, because that's the only power we have. That's all we've ever really had." Outside, the streets of Watts looked exactly as they had for the last 32 years. There were still broken sidewalks, failing businesses, and families packed into small apartments because they couldn't make the rent. The poverty was still there. The problems hadn't gone away. But the woman who had built a fortune off it all was finally gone. And for the first time in 3 decades, there was at least a glimmer of hope for something different, something better, and something real. It was finally time that actually belonged to the